Hey everybody, welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us on this Tuesday. A lot of news to get to today, including a growing bipartisan controversy now on Capitol Hill. Outrage, really, over President Trump's comparison of the impeachment inquiry to lynching in the United States. Here's the tweet that set off the firestorm. The president tweeting that if a Democrat becomes president someday, perhaps the Republicans will win the House even by a tiny margin. They can impeach the president without due process or fairness or any legal rights. All Republicans must remember what they're witnessing here, a lynching. Of course, the term has invoked the dark history in this country of violent and public hangings of predominantly African-American men, but also women, children, and Jews, largely in the American South during Jim Crow. During the period between the Civil War and World War II, historians estimate that some 4,000 African-American men were lynched in the United States. Members of both parties today expressing their outrage at the president's comparison. Here's a sample of some of the feedback. Take a look at what Susan Collins, Republican senator of Maine, is saying. She says lynching brings back images of a terrible time in our nation's history. The president never should have made that comparison. And Bobby Rush, civil rights leader, longtime congressman from Chicago, tweets that you think this impeachment is a lynching? What the hell is wrong with you? Do you know how many people who look like me have been lynched since the inception of this country by people who look like you? Delete the tweet. And a short time ago, the Senate Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, also weighing in on this in a rare rebuke of President Trump, saying he would not have used the word lynching, although he did support the president's characterization that impeachment is an unfair process. I want to bring in our investigative correspondent, Kira Phillips. She's here. She's done a lot of reporting on the history of impeachments in this country.
And I'm passionate about this.
Very passionate about
Yes.
Put some context around this. This is a lot of people perhaps scratching their heads going, here we go again with the political correctness police. But this one really hit a nerve.
Look, lynching, we're talking about community-sanctioned killings, okay? White mobs would come and cheer on and take pictures and root on the fact that black people were being tortured and lynched, hanging from trees. Also Jewish men, also black women, black children. I mean, for President Trump to make that comparison, I wonder if he learned about lynching in school. I wonder if he saw the pictures of lynchings in school.
To help our viewers better understand the context, some of the pictures you're talking about, Kira, we have some disturbing historical images here. We won't leave them up for long, but just to help you understand the context in which these remarks come out have been so upsetting to a lot of people, including several members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And we're joined now by the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, Karen Bass, Congresswoman of California. Thank you so much, Madam Congresswoman, for being here. Give us your reaction. What did you think of when you first saw the tweet?
Well, I do think that the president is consistent, that every time his back is against the wall, he throws out a racial bomb. And he knew that today was going to be a day of explosive testimony in the depositions, and I think he did that to throw us all off. He has done this time and time again, but how dare he compare our constitutional obligation for oversight to a hate crime. I think sometimes that he knows so little about the United States history that he doesn't realize that thousands of people were lynched, that these were actually social events, that they were advertised in the paper. Bring your kids, come out and watch us burn to death a black person. Watch us disembowel someone. These were social events that this is a horrific part of our history, but frankly, it's not that long ago. I mean, Texas just a couple of years ago executed a man because he had lynched another man, and this was within the last 10 years. So the idea that he would trivialize, and everything is always about him, that he would trivialize such an egregious moment in our history and compare it to what is really my constitutional obligation.
And Congressman, all of this, very well said there, all of this comes as the president prepares to make his first visit to a historically black college and university. As you know, on Friday, he's going down to Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina, where he'll be alongside a number of the Democratic candidates. What's your message to him as he prepares to go to this campus? And what should students, members of that historically black college, what message should they send to him as he arrives there?
Well, I actually think it's probably too bad that he's going, because I have no doubt in my mind what he's going to go and say. He wants black people to congratulate him because he's done so much for us, which is a complete lie. When he says that the black employment rate is down, that's fine, but that's not because of any specific program that he did whatsoever. If anything, he is in the midst of attempting to shred everything that has been accomplished in the civil rights movement and all of the litigation that happened afterwards. And right now, he is proposing to throw over 1 million people off of food stamps. And clearly, the majority of people that are on food stamps are white, but poor African Americans are also impacted by this as well.
Finally, Congresswoman Bass, I've just got to ask you said at the top of your comments that you thought that some of this was intended to be a distraction from the testimony that we're hearing today from Bill Taylor, the former ambassador. You were in that testimony, in that deposition. What was it that you heard that you think the president wanted to distract from?
Well, as you know, I'm not allowed to talk about what happened in the meeting, but I can say this. I can tell you that the ambassador did not retract his statement when he said that he thought it was crazy, the idea that you would withhold military assistance to an ally for political gain. I can tell you that the ambassador did not retract that statement.
Wow, and this is Bill Taylor, someone who is a career diplomat, well-respected by leaders in both parties.
Let me just say something, because I serve on foreign affairs, I travel the world a lot, I go to embassies all the time, and every time I go to an embassy, I have to act like a cheerleader, because the staff and the ambassadors are so demoralized because of the way that this administration has talked about them, cut their resources, and just completely have shoved them aside, that every time I go to another country, I go in and I thank them for their service. I tell them how much we appreciate what they're doing, and I think it's a sad state of affairs. I think what is happening to this president, though, is that this is the revenge of the State Department. I think that things are unraveling for him, because I think they have decided that they cannot take it any longer.
Karen Bass, Congresswoman of California, Chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on ABC News Live, Congresswoman. And our thanks to Ben Siegel, who is there producing. Kira, back to you here, because, you know, this is all of this is erupting at such a time when the president is under siege, really, and he has very few Republican defenders in all of this.
Well, and then we saw what happened with Mitch McConnell today. Should we roll that and discuss that?
Let's roll that tape. The Republican leader breaking with President Trump on his characterization of the Ukraine phone call.
I read Mitch McConnell's statement yesterday, and he read my phone call. And as you know, he put out a statement that said that was the most innocent phone call he's read. And I spoke to him about it, too. He read my phone call with the president of Ukraine, Mitch McConnell. He said that was the most innocent phone call that I've read.
The president has said that you told him that his phone call with the Ukrainian president was perfect and innocent. Do you believe that the president has handled this Ukrainian situation perfectly?
We've not had any conversations on that subject.
So he was lying about that?
You'll have to ask him. I don't recall any conversations with the president about that phone call.
Kira, a rare instance when you have the president saying he talked to the leader, was praised by the leader, and the leader going out in front of cameras and saying, well, actually, I never talked to the president about that. A lot of these Republicans staying away, keeping their distance.
Right, and at the same time, I mean, I got a chance to look through the opening statement from Bill Taylor today, and Democrats coming forward saying it was very dramatic, it was detailed, it was lengthy, and even Representative Andy Lemon, the Democrat from Michigan, saying that the U.S. diplomat's account was very troubling. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
It sure is. And real quick, let's go over to the White House, where Jordan Phelps is reporting today. Jordan, how are officials there responding to this whirlwind of news and controversies around the president today, all prompted by yet another tweet and some damning testimony?
Devin, the White House is trying to brush past this. White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley told reporters on the White House North Lawn today that the president simply wasn't comparing himself to the nation's dark history in lynching. Devin, that's a hard argument to make, of course, because that's the precise word the president chose to use this morning in his tweet. No effort here or indication that the White House is going to walk back that use of that phrase, that loaded phrase, or that the president will delete the tweet. Gidley also trying to brush this off, suggesting this is just another day at the White House, saying people are upset at what the president says all the time. And he's instead trying to pivot the discussion to the president's record, saying that he has actually done a lot that's been positive for the African-American community, pointing specifically to criminal justice reform and the strong employment numbers among the African-American community, Devin, to try to push back against all of this.
Another head-spinning day at the White House, to put it mildly. Jordan Phelps, thank you so much. We turn next to a controversial new immigration policy the Trump administration is rolling out this week at the Justice Department. The agency says all unauthorized immigrants apprehended at the southern border, including those seeking asylum, will now need to provide samples of their DNA. Quinn Owen, our immigration reporter, is here along with Noreen Shaw. She is with the ACLU, a senior policy advocate and policy counsel. Thank you for being here, Noreen. And let's start with you, Quinn, because this idea of collecting DNA samples from immigrants coming across is a head-scratcher for a lot of people. It seems very complicated and controversial.
Right, of course, and it's something that has civil liberties advocates very concerned, because obviously DNA being such a personal and identifiable thing, it could implicate, U.S. citizens who might have relationships with people trying to cross the border. This is something the Trump administration has been trying for some time. They rolled out a pilot program to test people, what they call fraudulent family units that are booked into immigrant detention earlier this year. Again, we still don't know what this will look like at the actual ports of entry. Homeland Security is still figuring out how they're going to start collecting the DNA and feeding that into a criminal database, but we're expecting to get more details. Yeah,
Noreen, you were talking about this. The ACLU obviously opposes this policy for a number of reasons. We're going to get into that, but it's very intrusive to collect DNA from someone through a blood draw, a swab. We don't know how they're going to do it here, but it would require a degree of intrusivity.
It's the most intimate kind of information that a person can give over. It's their genetic information. It tells you about what kind of illnesses they're predisposed to. It can even help you trace where their other family members are in the United States. We're talking about a policy the Trump administration wants to pursue that is really sweeping. It's extraordinary. It means hundreds of thousands of people every year getting their DNA forcibly taken, and then where it lives and how it is used is anybody's guess.
They haven't spelled it out. Quinn, they say, the Justice Department says in a statement that this policy is intended to beef up their database to prevent criminals from coming in and to cross-reference some of these migrants with crimes.
Right, exactly. This will go into the FBI national database that's used by police departments across the country. That's the idea behind this. So if when people are booked into regular jails, local jails, sometimes their information is taken and run against this database to see past criminal records. Again,
also sounds expensive.
It does sound costly, and not exactly sure. It's not exactly clear with the resource strain that's been put on the Department of Homeland Security over the past year how they're going to find the money to roll this whole thing out. Like I said, we're expecting some details on exactly what's going to happen at ports of entry, because keep in mind there are also people who are not authorized to cross that are attempting to go through the legal process at U.S. ports.
And Noreen, I understand the ACLU is going to wait to see some of the fine print before your organization decides whether to challenge this in court, like so many of other policies that ACLU is challenging. Before we go, I want to get you to sort of answer critics to this that we've seen on social today, sort of wondering, well, if we already collect fingerprints, we take pictures of migrants who cross, asylum seekers, other entrants, perhaps at an airport coming over from overseas. Why not? What's so wrong about collecting DNA as just one added layer of information?
Because your fingerprints aren't going to be used to say you might actually be predisposed to an illness, and then you're going to need insurance and you're going to need public benefits, so we don't want to let you enter. I mean, we've even got people saying that we can use DNA. They're claiming that they can use it to guess your sexual orientation. This is extremely dangerous for the government to be saying, hey, we can just take this from people, even if they're not under criminal investigation. Just because they want to keep us all under surveillance, they want to dehumanize the immigrant population, but we're also talking about this potentially eventually spreading to everybody else.
And certainly concerning for asylum seekers, people who are ostensibly trying to get away from some other abuses in their home countries. Certainly concerning to a lot of people. Noreen Shaw, thank you so much. Quinn Owen, thank you for coming on as always. Immigration policy front and center, of course, on the campaign trail as those Democrats target President Trump. And today, former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke was here in the briefing room to talk about immigration policy and a number of other issues out on the campaign. Congressman, great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Yeah. So the administration today announced plans to move forward with this proposal to collect DNA samples from migrants coming across the border. Is that worth it if it prevents or stops even one crime? They say this is a crime prevention tool.
This is part of the fear that the president is trying to stoke about immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. We know that they commit crimes in this country at a far lower rate than those who are born in this country. We know that they arrive at our border as vulnerable, as defenseless, as desperate as a human being can be. And not only is he proposing taking DNA from these asylum seekers, he's already placed them in cages, separated them from their families, lost the lives of 7 children over the course of the last year. And that's happening in the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, one that is comprised of immigrants and asylum seekers and their sons and daughters. So this is absolutely the wrong policy. And to answer your question, no, it does not improve the security or safety of our communities or our country.
And there does seem to be some evidence that these policies, as extreme as they may be, seem to be having some deterrent effect. I mean, the numbers have been coming down at the border. Do you attribute some of that decline in the migrant crisis to what they have been doing?
You're asking, is it owing to the cruelty and the torture committed by this president against defenseless children, or this Orwellian-named migrant protection protocol, where you have tens of thousands of asylum seekers waiting in Ciudad Juarez or Tijuana or Matamoros, not able to process their asylum claims here? That may have some effect, but is that the price that we're willing to pay? Is that something that we want to have on our conscience, a stain on our memory? I think we need to follow our own asylum laws and recognize that part of the greatness of this country is owed to those who chose us and came here when they had no other place to go to. As president, I will never separate a family or incarcerate a child or treat them with the inhumanity that they have been that they've received from this president under this administration. I want to rewrite our immigration laws so that they fully reflect the reality on the ground. The fact that these asylum seekers are not a threat.
Would you decriminalize the border crossings?
I would never criminally prosecute anyone seeking asylum or refuge. I'd never incarcerate another family. In fact, I'd end for-profit migrant detention centers anywhere in this country going forward. This is perhaps the greatest promise that we have as a country. Those who choose to come here and by their very presence make us stronger, more successful. And I tell you this from the perspective of El Paso, one of the safest communities in the United States of America. By their very presence, they make us safer and more secure than we would have been otherwise.
I'm going to ask you about a big controversy today in Washington. I know you've seen it because you've weighed in on it on Twitter. A lot of Democrats have been condemning President Trump's use of the word lynching in comparison to impeachment. You've been traveling the country, you've been talking to a lot of people. Do you think we've all become sort of desensitized to these sort of outrageous statements by him? Do you find that voters are just sort of, it's baked into the cake with Donald Trump? I mean, this is just yet another in a long litany of things that have people fired up.
He certainly wants to normalize this bizarre behavior, these kinds of injustices, the lies that he's been telling. But it's interesting, earlier I was in Alabama, in Montgomery, in the Legacy Museum and the Memorial to Peace and Justice. And there you see the names of the African Americans who were lynched in this country from 1877 to 1950. Absolutely. Every single county, and not just in the Deep South, although that's the preponderance of the victims, but throughout this country. For the president to invoke that word to describe what he's experiencing as the most powerful man on the face of the planet today, a white man who's enjoyed privilege and power unknown to so many millions more in this country, is one of the most obscene things that I've heard him say in an administration that is rife with obscenity. So
you say he's a white supremacist.
He is, absolutely. And not only has he brought forward and into the open a racism, an intolerance, and a hatred that is has long defined the American experience for too many, but he's also directed that and its violence towards populations that don't look like or love like or pray like the majority. We saw that brought home to us in El Paso, Texas on August 3rd when a gunman armed with an AK-47 opened fire in a Walmart, repeating the same words the president had used, warning of an invasion, of an infestation, of being replaced by Hispanics as a member of the white majority. So this president poses a mortal danger to our fellow Americans.
And yet so many in your state support him, if not for those reasons and the language that he uses, for a host of other reasons. But do you find those people, particularly people in the middle, the kind of the Obama swing voters, people who voted for Obama, voted for Donald Trump, are they also racist? Do you see a strain in those people of white supremacy? How do you explain that juxtaposition?
If you're talking about Texas, the support he may have enjoyed in 2016 has largely evaporated. In a head-to-head contest with Donald Trump, the polling indicates that we would come out on top. And this is a state that last elected or selected a Democrat for president in 1976 with Jimmy Carter. So the trends that we see in Texas, where last year we only lost by 2.6% to Ted Cruz, won more votes than any Democrat had before, won independents for the first time in decades, and nearly 500,000 Republicans. That's the way that we defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020. And Texas, with 38 electoral college votes, could make that victory decisive so that there's no open question that the president can exploit to try to build upon the division that he's created in this country.
So you think you're the most electable Democratic candidate in this race?
I do, and Texas makes that case more clearly than anything else that I could say. Those 38 electoral votes not only put Donald Trump away forever, but they also forever changed the electoral landscape in the United States of America. They allow us to build the majorities we need to confront climate change, to rewrite our laws when it comes to immigration or health care, or including more people in the economy. A very ambitious agenda before us. The ability to defeat Donald Trump and then bring this divided country together again is important if we're going to be able to overcome any or all of these challenges.
And how do you convince more Americans, like the Texans that believe in you, that you are electable in a red state? How do you make that case? I mean, we're in crunch time now. You've seen the numbers with Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden. You've been hanging out in the single digits. You're struggling to get into the November debate. But here we are. How do you kick it into gear? What is the case you need to be making?
Yeah, almost always in presidential cycles at this time in the election, the front runner loses their perch. Those in single digits ultimately rise up. That's almost always been the case, at least in the Democratic primary. So I take some comfort in my reading of history, some comfort in the fact that almost 90% of our fellow Americans, those who will be voting in the Democratic primaries, have yet to make up their mind.
Do you have to win Iowa?
We have to do very well in Iowa. And in fact, after this interview, I'm headed to Iowa to be with those who will decide the first caucus in the nation, and to make sure that I have a chance to answer their questions and be with them in their communities.
100 days away. Finally, I want to ask you about Facebook, because they announced this week that Russia is already laying the groundwork to meddle again in the 2020 election, and the company announced some steps they're taking. Do you think Facebook is doing enough to prevent a repeat of 2016?
No. And we're not doing enough as a country to hold them accountable. Right now, legally, we treat Facebook and other social media platforms akin to a utility, as though they have no control over the content that passes through their pipes, when in reality, they're more like a publisher. They curate the content that we see. You and I, the people on Facebook, have become the products on Facebook. And so they must be regulated as a publisher would be regulated, held accountable for the content that is published. And the fact that they've allowed Donald Trump to purchase advertising that lies about Joe Biden, a prospective Democratic challenger, shows that Facebook right now is not obeying the rules of the road that we need to protect our democracy and ensure that we have free and fair elections in 2020.
Mark Zuckerberg is going to face a lot of questions tomorrow on Capitol Hill. He'll be here, and you'll be in Iowa. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Appreciate
for coming
it.
in. And for more on Facebook and foreign attempts to influence voters in the 2020 campaign, I'm joined now by Jennifer Greigel, an assistant professor of communications at Syracuse University, also a social media expert. Jennifer, it's great to see you. So what did you make of this news from Facebook that the Russians are back at it again using the platform? Do you think the company's doing enough?
You know, Absolutely not. And there will be a lot of attention on what Russia is doing and what Iran is doing. But I'm here to call attention to the research that I've been doing on what's called U.S. state media. And just calling attention to this because a lot of people don't understand that the United States government also has state media here and that it has abused Facebook ads over the last 2 years. So in this announcement from Facebook, they also mentioned something just called government interference and said that it's especially egregious when a government propagandizes essentially its own people. So I'm here today to really draw public attention to that, because if anyone has read the president's tweets today or last week or last month, they understand that domestically media can be abused here. So plenty of folks will be talking about Russia and Iran, but we need to be talking about what's happening here.
Yeah, abused by so many actors who are seeking to push misinformation, including some of the campaigns, as you know well. And I guess it begs the question, after going through the 2016 cycle, hearing endless reports from Robert Mueller about what he found on the platform, I mean, how can all of us better equip ourselves to suss out fake news, misleading information, foreign interference on Facebook? I mean, what, practically speaking, specifically, what can we look for to know if we're seeing it in action right before our eyes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of people, again, are talking about fake news and misinformation, but we need to just talk about the basics of influence and propaganda at this point. So in the past, there have been federal propaganda laws that have been considered here in the United States, but we have to, as a public, understand that these social media platforms are not regulated. And Facebook and Twitter and others are putting forward this idea that they're doing more to prevent this meddling that took place in 2016, but they really haven't done enough. So they're starting to introduce labels, but we need to make sure that this applies to all of the media out there that will be influencing us, when it's not like the free press or the independent media or what they've also described as publicly funded media. So that's like your NPR. That should not be in the same category as like Voice of America, which is the U.S. state media here. Or as YouTube has been labeling actually for a little while, like, Russia Today. Again, that's, what we call state media or state-controlled media. But just knowing that there are a multitude of places where we could be experiencing influence, both domestically and foreignly. And, people just need to make sure that they're consuming good bylines from folks that they know and trust, and, kind of considering the source even more so going into 2020.
And news aside, we saw so many of these accounts that were just removed also in 2016 were of groups purporting to be grassroots organizers of political activity, rallies for Donald Trump, perhaps some protesters against Joe Biden or whatever the like. I mean, would you be leery if you were a politically engaged Facebook user or participating in any of those groups right now? I mean, should there sort of be a blanket skepticism of any of those tools?
Any label could be, fraudulent at this point. You'll often see them riffing off of patriotic terms like freedom or liberty, especially knowing that those are kind of memes that are popular within politics. What's shocking in the latest announcement is that BLM News was an account that was brought down, and we knew that Black Lives Matter as a movement was targeted. And I just can't believe that Facebook was not taking more proactive research in an attempt to make sure that that wasn't being abused. And so they've introduced this kind of Facebook Protect to protect, government officials and accounts that are going to be running for office. But we need them to do a better effort with some of the people who aren't running for office as well. Some of the leaders in political movements or social movements as well, because they are also being targeted.
Jennifer Greigel is a Deputy Assistant Professor of Communications at Syracuse University, a social media expert. Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate your views. And finally today, we're going to pay tribute to one of our former colleagues, Gwen Ifill of the PBS NewsHour, who passed away in November 2016 after a long battle of cancer. She was 61. Well, today she made it onto a stamp. The U.S. Postal Service released this stamp in honor of Black Heritage Month. Gwen Ifill, seen there in a 2008 photo, will be recognized as the 43rd stamp in that series. She, of course, was a giant in media for 17 years as a co-anchor anchor of the NewsHour, and we salute Gwen Ifill and all journalists over there remembering her today. Well, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We're here every day, 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC News Live. Hope you download the ABC News app to follow the latest on all the stories we've talked about today. And join us right back here tomorrow, 3:30. I'll be here. Hope to see you then.